No one remembers the moment a childhood ends. There is no bell, no line to cross, no voice announcing that the world has changed shape forever. It simply happens, quietly, without witnesses, and only years later does the memory harden into something that can be named. For Daniel, it happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn, when the leaves were still green and his backpack was heavier than it needed to be. He was 6 years old and counting cracks in the sidewalk on his way home from school. His mother had told him to come straight back, as she always did, but that day the sun felt warm enough to slow him down. He stopped to kick at a pebble, then another. A white van pulled over. That detail would come later, reconstructed by police and journalists and strangers online. At the time, it was just a vehicle stopping too close to the curb. The window slid down. A man leaned out and said Daniel's name. Children are taught not to talk to strangers. They are not taught what to do when a stranger already knows who they are. Daniel hesitated. The man smiled, not wide enough to seem threatening, not narrow enough to be comforting. He said Daniel's mother had sent him. He said there had been an accident. He said it was urgent. Daniel took one step closer. That was enough. By the time the van pulled away, Daniel's shoe lay sideways in the gutter, its lace trailing as something dropped by mistake. A neighbor would notice it an hour later. By then, the city had already begun the slow, terrible work of forgetting. Children disappear in phases. First, there is noise, sirens, search parties, faces printed on paper and taped to lampposts. News anchors say the child's name with a practiced seriousness that suggests concern but guarantees nothing. Then comes the waiting, candlelight vigils, phone calls in the night, dreams that feel real enough to hurt, and finally, silence. Daniel's mother learned this rhythm too well. She stood in front of cameras for weeks, repeating the same phrases until they lost meaning. She described the mole on his neck, the way his hair curled behind his ears, and the dinosaur he slept with every night. She begged, then demanded, then asked. Over time, the crowd thinned. Reporters stopped calling. The posters curled at the edges, then vanished. Daniel was not found. The place where Daniel was taken did not exist on any map. It was a house at the end of a dirt road, hidden by trees that leaned inward as though trying to close the space. From the outside, it looked ordinary in the way many places of harm do. White siding, a sagging porch, a mailbox with no name. Inside, it was quiet. The man who took Daniel called himself Arthur. That was not his real name, though Daniel wouldn't learn that for many years. Arthur spoke softly. He moved slowly. He never raised his voice. That, Daniel would later understand, was part of the design. On the first night, Arthur gave him soup. On the second, clean clothes. On the third, a new name. "You can't be Daniel here," Arthur said, as if explaining a rule of the house. "That name belongs to someone else," Daniel cried. Arthur waited. Eventually, exhaustion did what fear could not. Daniel nodded. "You're Evan now," Arthur said, "and Evan doesn't ask questions." Time behaves differently in captivity. Days stretch, years collapse, birthdays pass unnoticed. Seasons are marked not by weather, but by routine. The mind adapts because it has to. Evan learned the rules quickly. He was not to touch the front door. He was not to look out the windows unless Arthur said it was allowed. He was not to speak his old name. He was not to ask about his family. Arthur never locked Evan in a room. There were no chains, no visible restraints. Instead, there were consequences. quiet, measured, devastating in their certainty. A meal withheld. A light was left off all night. A look of disappointment that lingered for days. "You don't want to make things harder," Arthur would say. "This is your life now. Fighting it only makes it worse." Evan believed him. 2 years later, another child arrived. Her name was Lena, though Arthur renamed her Mara within hours. She was 5 years old, with hair cut unevenly, as if someone had tried to trim it themselves. She cried longer than Evan had. She asked questions he knew better than to ask. Evan watched from the hallway as Arthur explained the rules again, his voice calm, almost patient. Lena screamed. Arthur waited. That night, Evan crept to her door after Arthur went to sleep. He sat on the floor and whispered through the crack beneath it. "It gets easier," he said, though he did not believe it. Lena did not answer. The years accumulated quietly. Evan learned to read from the old books Arthur brought home. He learned math, history, geography, enough to understand that the world was large and he was not in it. Arthur said school was dangerous. Arthur said people lied. Arthur said families abandoned children all the time. "They didn't come looking for you," Arthur told him once. "If they wanted you, they'd have found you." Evan tried to remember his mother's face. It blurred at the edges. The sound of her voice became something imagined. Lena stopped crying after the first year. She grew quiet, watchful. She followed the rules without being reminded. She forgot her real name. Arthur seemed pleased. There were other children, eventually. A boy called Thomas, taken at 7, who resisted longer than the rest. A girl named Ivy, small and pale, who barely spoke at all. Not all of them stayed. Some were taken away again, for reasons Arthur never explained. "They went home," he said. "Be grateful you're still here." Evan learned not to ask what that meant. They lived together like ghosts, moving through the house without sound. They shared stories and whispers when Arthur was gone, fragments of memories that felt increasingly unreal. A blue bicycle, a dog with one eye, a grandmother who smelled like soap. Over time, even those stories stopped. Arthur aged. His hair thinned. His hands trembled when he poured coffee. The rules did not change. By the time Evan turned 16, though no one marked the date, he had been in the house longer than he had ever been free. The world outside felt like a rumor. Once, while Arthur was asleep, Evan stood by the window and watched snowfall. He tried to imagine stepping outside, letting it touch his skin. The thought filled him with a fear so sharp he stepped back immediately. Freedom, he realized, was no longer comforting. It was terrifying. Lena disappeared when Evan was 17. Arthur said she had been reunited with her family. He said she was lucky. He said Evan should be happy for her. Evan nodded. That night, he cried quietly into his pillow, unsure why the grief felt heavier than it should. He tried to picture Lena as an adult, walking freely, calling someone by their real name. He wondered if she would remember him. The end did not come suddenly. It came the way everything else had. Slowly, almost politely. Arthur had a stroke one winter morning. Evan found him on the kitchen floor, unable to speak, one side of his face slack. For the first time in years, Evan stood over him with no instructions. He waited. Arthur lived for 3 more days. On the 4th, the house was silent. Evan stood in the hallway for hours, afraid to move. The rules still echoed in his head. The fear remained even when the authority was gone. Eventually, hunger pushed him forward. He opened the front door. The outside world was louder than he remembered. Evan walked until his feet hurt, then kept walking. He did not know where he was going. He did not know who he was supposed to be. When a woman in a grocery store asked if he was okay, he stared at her, unable to answer. Words felt dangerous. The police station smelled like disinfectant and coffee. Evan sat in a plastic chair and told them his name was Evan. That was the first lie they would have to undo. Identification took weeks. Fingerprints, DNA, missing persons databases that had not been updated in years. When they finally matched him to a boy named Daniel, abducted nearly 2 decades earlier, the detective closed the file slowly, as if afraid it might disappear again. Daniel did not recognize the name. Meeting his mother was worse. She was older than he expected, smaller. She cried when she saw him, the sound raw and uncontained. She touched his face as if confirming he was real. Daniel stood stiffly, unsure how to respond. He felt like an imposter wearing her son's body. They both understood, without saying it, that something irreplaceable had been lost. The others were found eventually, some alive, some not, some with names that no longer fit, some who refused to speak at all. The media called them survivors. The word felt inaccurate. Survival suggested something intact. Daniel learned how to live again in fragments. He learned how to sleep without listening for footsteps. He learned how to say his real name without flinching. He learned that healing was not linear and that time did not restore what it took. Sometimes he dreamed of the house. Sometimes he dreamed of the boy he had been. He woke up knowing one thing with certainty. Not all kidnappings end when the door opens. Some continue quietly inside the people who leave. This story reflects real patterns found in long-term child abduction cases. Children can disappear in moments of inattention, routine, or trust. Please remain vigilant, stay present, and teach your children situational awareness. Awareness and supervision remain the strongest forms of prevention. If this story affected you, take a moment to pause. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered and told responsibly, like the video and subscribe to support the channel. Your engagement helps ensure these voices are not forgotten and these stories are not erased by time.